In the heart of a peaceful kingdom, young Nia's world shatters when her brother mysteriously disappears. As her village dismisses the danger, Nia uncovers a terrifying truth about their beloved King Tambo. With the weight of her discovery pressing down on her, she embarks on a dangerous quest into the depths of the palace, where dark secrets and unimaginable horrors await. Will she conquer the evil within, or will the darkness consume her too? Once upon a time, in a land far away, there was a king named Tambo. He ruled over a peaceful kingdom known for its beautiful valleys and clear rivers. The people loved King Tambo for he was wise and generous. But one day everything changed. One evening, King Tambo gathered his people for a feast. The celebration was grand with music, dancing, and endless food. But as the night grew darker, the king stood from his throne, his eyes gleaming strangely. He looked at his people, not with the warmth they were used to, but with a hunger that sent a chill down their spines. The next morning, something horrible happened. Several people from the feast were missing. Families searched for their loved ones, but there was no sign of them. Fear spread throughout the kingdom like wildfire. But nobody dared question the king. After all, he was their leader, and no one would believe that their beloved king could have anything to do with the disappearances. One day, a young girl named Nia, brave but curious, decided to investigate. Her brother was among the missing, and she couldn't bear the thought of never seeing him again. She began to notice strange things happening around the palace. At night, she would hear strange noises, almost like growls, coming from within the palace walls. The once kind king had also become distant and cold, almost like a shadow of his former self. Nia tried to speak to the townspeople, but they brushed off her concerns, too scared to believe anything ill of the king. He is our protector, they would say. He could never hurt us. But Nia knew something was terribly wrong. She decided to sneak into the palace at night, hoping to find clues that would lead her to the missing villagers. That night she dressed in black, tiptoed across the palace courtyard, and slipped into the shadows, careful not to be seen by the guards. She moved silently through the dark hallways, her heart pounding in her chest. As she passed the kitchen, she heard faint whispers. Two of the palace servants were talking, their voices shaking with fear. "He did it again," one whispered. "Another one taken, just like the others." "Shoo!" the other hissed. "You know we must not speak of this, or we will be next." Nia's heart raced. She had to find out what they were talking about. She crept closer to the grand dining hall, the place where the king often held his midnight feasts. The doors were slightly ajar, and as she peeked inside, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The king was sitting at the long dining table, but he wasn't alone. Around him were the missing villagers. But they weren't sitting at the table, they were lying on it, pale and lifeless. The king, with a twisted smile on his face, was feasting on them. Nia gasped, her hand covering her mouth to stop the scream that threatened to escape. She stumbled backward, terrified of what she had just seen. She had to leave the palace and warn the others. But as she turned to run, she felt a cold hand grab her shoulder. Nia froze in terror. Nia's heart pounded as she slowly turned to face whoever had grabbed her shoulder. She was certain it was the king, but when she looked up, she was met with the frightened eyes of a palace servant, a young boy, no older than herself. His face was pale and he was trembling as he held a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. He released her shoulder and whispered, "You must leave before he finds you. If he knows you've seen, you will never escape." Nia nodded, her breath coming in short gasps, but she didn't move. She wanted to run, but her feet were frozen in place, her mind racing with the horrifying images she had just witnessed. The boy tugged at her sleeve. "There's a secret passage in the kitchen. I'll show you the way out, but you have to be quiet." Reluctantly, Nia followed the boy, her heart still thudding in her chest. She kept glancing back at The dining hall, afraid the king might come after them. They slipped into the kitchen and the boy led her to a narrow door hidden behind a shelf of pots. He opened it to reveal a dark, narrow staircase that led down into the earth. "Go," the boy urged. "This tunnel will take you outside the palace walls." "What about you?" Nia asked, her voice trembling. "Won't he know you helped me?" The boy shook his head. "I'll be safe, as long as you don't tell anyone you saw me. Now go, before it's too late." With one last glance at the boy, Nia darted down the stairs, her mind filled with the horrors of what she had just seen. She could hear the distant sound of the king's footsteps echoing through the palace, and her fear propelled her forward. The tunnel was damp and cold, but Nia didn't care. She ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Finally, after what felt like hours, she emerged into the cool night air. Outside the palace walls, she collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. But there was no time to rest. She had to warn the others. She had to tell them what kind of monster their king truly was. Nia scrambled to her feet and ran toward the village, her mind racing with what she would say. When she arrived, the village was quiet, the streets empty. She ran to her house and burst through the door, shouting for her mother. Her mother, startled by the commotion, came running from the back room. "Nia, what's wrong?" Nia's voice shook as she tried to explain. "The king. He's not what we thought. He's been eating people. The missing villagers. I saw them." Her mother's face paled, but she shook her head in disbelief. "Nia, that's impossible. The king is a good man. He would never." "I saw it," Nia cried, her eyes filling with tears. "I saw him with my own eyes. He was eating them, Mama. We have to stop him." Her mother hesitated, torn between disbelief and the fear in her daughter's voice. "Nia, you mustn't say such things. If the king hears of this, he already knows." Nia interrupted. "I barely escaped with my life." Her mother's face drained of color, and she pulled Nia close. "We can't let anyone hear you. If the king finds out what you've seen, he will come for us." Nia knew her mother was right, but she also knew they couldn't stay silent. They had to find a way to stop the king before more people disappeared. But how could they stop a king who held so much power? As Nia lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. She knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. But who could she trust? The people were too afraid to speak out against the king. Then an idea struck her. The boy, the servant from the palace. He had helped her escape. Maybe he knew more about what was happening inside the palace. Maybe he knew a way to stop the king. The next day, Nia set out for the palace again, determined to find the boy. This time she wouldn't be sneaking in. She would find a way to confront the king, and this time she wouldn't run. Nia approached the palace again, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. This time she wasn't going in the way she had before. She couldn't sneak around anymore. If she wanted to find out the truth and stop the king, she needed to confront the situation head-on. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. She had to find the servant boy, the one who had helped her escape. The night before, the market near the palace was busy with villagers selling fruits and vegetables, their cheerful conversations in stark contrast to Nia's heavy heart. She scanned the faces, hoping to spot the boy among them. But how would she recognize him in the light of day? She barely remembered what he looked like. Suddenly, she felt a tug on her sleeve. Startled, Nia spun around and came face to face with the boy. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if afraid someone was watching them. "I told you to leave," he whispered urgently. "Why are you back?" "I need your help," Nia replied, her voice just as low. "We have to stop the king. He's going to keep doing this unless we do something." The boy shook his head. "You don't understand. No one can stop him. If anyone tries, they disappear. just like the villagers. Nia's heart sank. She had expected the boy to be scared, but she hadn't anticipated this level of fear. "There has to be a way," she insisted. "You know what he's doing. You helped me escape. We can't just stand by and let him keep hurting people." The boy looked down at the ground, his face pale. "It's not just the king," he whispered after a long pause. "There are others." Nia's breath caught in her throat. "Others? What do you mean?" The boy hesitated before answering. "The palace. It's not what it seems. There's a secret. Beneath it, something dark and ancient. The king isn't working alone. There are others who control him." Nia felt a chill run down her spine. This was worse than she had imagined. If the king wasn't acting on his own, how could they possibly stop him? She clenched her fists, determination bubbling up inside her. "Then we'll stop them too. Whoever they are, we can't let them keep doing this." The boy's eyes widened. "You don't understand. These aren't ordinary people. They have powers, dark powers." Nia swallowed hard. "I don't care. We can't just do nothing." The boy stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "There might be a way," he whispered. "But it's dangerous. If we fail, we'll both disappear." Nia took a deep breath. "Tell me what we need to do." The boy glanced around again, making sure no one was listening. "There's an old woman in the village, a healer. She knows things about the palace, about the darkness inside it. If anyone can help us, it's her." Nia nodded. "Where can I find her?" "I'll take you to her," the boy said, his voice tense. "But we have to be careful. The king's spies are everywhere." As they made their way through the crowded streets, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every glance felt suspicious. But she knew there was no turning back now. If they didn't stop the king and whatever dark force controlled him, more people would suffer. They arrived at a small, weathered hut on the edge of the village. The boy knocked on the door, and after a moment, it creaked open. An old woman stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp and knowing. She didn't say a word, just motioned for them to come inside. The interior of the hut was dark, the air thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. Nia could barely make out the shapes of various bottles and jars lining the walls. The old woman sat down, in front of a small fire, her gaze never leaving Nia. "I know why you've come," the old woman said, her voice raspy. "You seek to stop the darkness." Nia nodded, her throat dry. "Yes, the king, I know what he's doing," the old woman interrupted. "But the king is only a puppet. The true evil lies deeper." Nia exchanged a glance with the boy, her heart racing. "Then how do we stop it?" she asked. The old woman stirred the fire with a long stick, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "There is a way," she said slowly, "but it will require great courage and great sacrifice." Nia leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What do we have to do?" The old woman looked at her for a long moment, then spoke in a low, ominous voice. "You must enter the palace's deepest chamber. There, you will find the source of the darkness. But beware, once you enter, there may be no way back." Nia's stomach twisted with fear, but she nodded. "We'll do it." The old woman nodded gravely. "Then you must prepare yourselves. The path ahead will be dangerous, and the darkness will try to consume you. But if you are strong enough, you may succeed." Nia clenched her fists. She had no choice. They had to stop the king, no matter what it took. As the old woman handed them a small vial of glowing liquid, she whispered one last warning. "Remember, the darkness is always watching. Be careful whom you trust." With that, Nia and the boy set out on their dangerous journey to the heart of the palace, where unimaginable horrors awaited them. As Nia and the boy approached the palace under the cover of night, the weight of the old woman's warning hung heavily on them. Armed with the glowing vial, they crept into the palace, sticking to the shadows, The familiar chill in the air deepened as they descended into the lower chambers of the palace, a place few had ever seen. The walls were cold and damp, and the flickering light of their torch barely pierced the suffocating darkness. Nia could feel the malevolent presence of the evil the old woman had warned them about. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on, determined to stop the curse that had gripped her village for far too long. They reached a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway. It was covered in strange symbols, pulsating faintly with an eerie glow. Nia and the boy exchanged a glance, knowing that this was the final barrier between them and the source of the darkness. The boy hesitated, but Nia stepped forward, pushing the door open. Inside was a vast chamber, dimly lit by a strange light emanating from the center of the room. There, sitting on a stone throne, was the king. But he was not the same man she had seen before. His eyes glowed red, and his body seemed twisted by some unnatural force. And standing beside him were shadowy figures, creatures that barely resembled humans, with twisted, elongated limbs and glowing eyes. These were the dark beings controlling the king. Nia's heart skipped a beat, but she remembered the vial in her hand. The old woman had said this was the key to defeating the darkness. She turned to the boy. "We have to pour this on the source," she whispered. He nodded, fear flashing in his eyes, but he stood by her side as they cautiously approached the throne. The king's eyes followed their every move, but he didn't react until they were within a few feet of him. Suddenly, he rose from his throne, his twisted body lurching forward. "You dare come here," he roared, his voice echoing throughout the chamber. "You cannot defeat the darkness. It is eternal." The shadowy creatures began to advance, their forms shifting and twisting in the dim light. Nia's grip tightened around the vial, her heart pounding in her chest. "Now!" she shouted to the boy. In one swift motion, they opened the vial and threw the glowing liquid onto the king and the creatures. The moment the liquid touched them, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light. Nia shielded her eyes, feeling a powerful force surging around them. The creatures let out piercing shrieks as they dissolved into the light. The king staggered back, clutching his chest, as the dark power that had controlled him for so long began to fade. His red eyes dulled, and his twisted form slowly reverted to that of a man. The light continued to intensify until finally it exploded, sending a shockwave through the palace. When Nia opened her eyes, the chamber was silent. The shadowy creatures were gone, and the king lay on the ground, unconscious but alive. The oppressive darkness that had suffocated the palace had lifted. Nia turned to the boy, relief washing over her. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. As they left the chamber, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. The village was free, the curse broken. The king, now stripped of the dark power that had controlled him, would answer for his crimes. But as Nia and the boy walked away from the palace, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at a great cost. The darkness may have been defeated, but its presence still lingered, a reminder of the evil that had once ruled their land. For now, though, Nia could breathe easily, knowing that her village was safe and the nightmare was finally over. At least for now. Hope you enjoyed our stories. Please subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories and folktales. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to help us create even more captivating content.